Pierre Lamont d'Iberville arrived here in 1699, he not only had French troops from France, but he also had his loyal French Canadians since he was Canadian born. And that was an important aspect of what he was doing, to have somebody who was loyal to him. And of course, later on, we find that the Cajun people arrive. And when they arrive, you have another influx of some different type of culture, but French culture that arrives at the same time. And he arrived here on February 3rd, 1699 at what is today Ship Island. They named it the Ile of the Vessels. He did some exploration. He came ashore in present-day Biloxi. He walked the peninsula tracing Indians and pursued them when he reached the mouth of the bay, and he pursued them to the other side of the bay and met up with them and eventually become friends with them. And there was three groups, and that was the Biloxis, the Pascagoula, and the Mobilias. On present-day Ocean Springs, they built a fort at that location. One Saint Denis Juchereau stayed at the fortification when they moved to Mobile in 1702, because they abandoned the Biloxi Bay area and went to Mobile in 1702. So there has been someone along the Gulf Coast the whole time that the French were here and continued on through the different colonial periods. In the 1719, 1718 period, we see an influx of people when John Law creates what is to be known as the Mississippi Bubble, which will eventually burst. Now, they originally are recruiting young French girls, but they're finding that the French girls are not as tolerant to the settlement here. It's a little rough area to be coming from places like Paris. And he starts recruiting German families and Swiss families. And the reason for that, the girls seem to be more robust. So we end up having families come in from at that period of time. And in 1720, we know that there was a good bit of concessions along the beach in Biloxi. And in each one of those concessions was a certain amount of Germans. And they were names like dupes, which would eventually become Frenched and made into toupes, and touche, which actually was Tuchek. It was actually, the man was from Prague, Czechoslovakia, present-day Czechoslovakia. People who came into the area were swallowed up by the French. Well, when you're looking at the colonial portion, we always had that tie with Mobile and New Orleans. As time went along, we were tied more to Louisiana, to New Orleans. And that influence was, that French cultural influence remained firm on the Mississippi Gulf Coast until we start seeing the beginnings of tourism developing in the 1850s and also the development of the seafood industry in the 1880s. So the influences are totally French up to that point in houses, whether you call it a Creole house or the various structures that were referred to as Southern cultural houses. They are all based on the French, in particular the galleries or the porches. The wraparound galleries are typically French. Any gallery that covers most of the house is typically French influences. In 1914, we have the arrival of the first Cajuns along the Mississippi Gulf Coast to work the seafood industry. Each group that came in, there was prejudice showed towards them as they arrived because people were fearful that they would lose their jobs. But the industry was growing so rapidly that they needed all these laborers. It was totally different French, developed a little bit different because of their location in Nova Scotia and from what the colonial development was here along the Mississippi Gulf Coast in Louisiana. The French who arrived were referred to, once you had they arrived, they were all usually born in either Canada or in France. The ones born in France, their children who were born to them were called Creoles. And that was someone born outside of the native country to parents from the native country and their descendants. A lot of people think Creole means that you had some kind of mixed blood. But in the beginning, Creole meant that you were either a French Creole, the Spanish had it too, a Spanish Creole, born outside of the country, or even in some cases African Creole. We see that reflected in New Orleans, where you have the cooking cultures that are French Creole, Spanish Creole, and African Creole. So we have that good mix of the all. But the Cajuns came in and they were a little bit different lifestyle. And even the Creoles who were in Louisiana at the time of the arrival of Cajuns showed some prejudice towards them because they had been here a long time, and here comes a new group of people. So when they arrive on the Mississippi Gulf Coast, they bring a lot of that culture with them. The fun for music, work hard, but play hard. Once they arrived here, you had local French, and we talked just about that cultural mix. You had local French already here. They got together with the Cajun French, and they began to talk in 1931 about developing a society. In fact, one of the gentlemen from North Biloxi, who was part of the colonial French, recommended that they use the Fleur de Lis as the name of the society because it was in line with the Bourbon Kings. So they accepted that, and they became the Fleur de Lis Society, or the French Club as it's commonly called today. And in 1933, they incorporated and became the organization for the French. In the beginning, they were there for cultural purposes. They wanted their girls to meet nice French boys and to marry nice French boys. And that didn't happen because it was people marrying Savonians, it was people marrying the Bohemians, and it all got mixed in the same on the other side as well. But that was their original intent. The other thing was, the first thing and firstmost thing was to bury the dead. They found that if they took up a dues and one of their members died, they could have enough money to bury them. Because if the male, who was the main support of the family at the time, died, then the woman was left with all the burden of burying her husband and taking care of her family. And that's one of the reasons that they started the society. And the other thing is, they like to have fun, and they could get together and cook and do the fête dodo, which has its roots in Louisiana. The fête dodo, basically what it means is to make sleep, or to make dodo, or to sleep. What it started as is in Louisiana, the Cajuns would have a party at somebody's house. It was an opportunity for the kids to meet, they could hook up with, and eventually marry. That first they ate, then they would dance. Well, they had the problem with the little kids. So the little kids were taken to the buggy, and some of the ones that are a little bit older would watch over them, so they would make sleep, and the parents and the young adults would party in the house. Fête dodo. A lot of people think it's a street dance, and in some ways and aspects it is, but it's still the fête dodo. It's still that opportunity to get together, have a good time, and enjoy a little bit of the French culture and eat well and drink well. You had a lot of the shotgun houses on the east end of Biloxi where the French, the Savonians, and the Bohemians were, and that was a mainstay of most of the families, that particular style home. Unfortunately, Katrina took a lot of that away. I guess the most visible thing today would be the French Club itself, because it's been rebuilt over and over again after Camille, after Katrina. It's down and out for the duration of the storm, but it's pick up the pieces at the end, and it kind of becomes that symbol for everybody to pull to from the French community. Most people who grew up here, they're not going to leave. I wasn't born in the '47 storm, but I was here for Camille, and I was here for Katrina, and I'm going nowhere. I might move a little further north, but I'm going nowhere. I'm going to stay right here along the coast. The strongest thing about the French people, they will always take care of each other. They will always party hard together, and they will fight hard with each other. But it's all because they love the culture, they love their heritage.